I used to be ashamed of my past and unsure if I'd make it to where I was going. But I knew one thing was for certain. We don't end up where we're going on accident. I've also learned that we can't erase the past or hide from it, but we can learn from it and pass it on to others. So who am I? I'm the definition of a bootstrap girl. Someone who's made the hard choices to pick themselves back up and make something of themselves. And I'm not the only one. My name is Danisha. I'm a mom, a wife, a professor, advocate, queen of my own path, who's overcome abuse, foster care, homelessness, and raising 5 siblings on my own at the age of 24. And eventually I got a PhD. But something that I learned is that I don't know everything. So here on my show, we're going to be bringing in people who know the things that we don't know. Let's get in and learn on the Dr. Danisha Keating Show.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I am so excited to have the Mack with us. He is a musician. He is a stellar person. He's great at all things collaboration, and he agreed to say yes to the podcast. And so I'm really excited to talk with him on how to build healthy relationships when it comes to building a career in what we get to do. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself and just tell us everything we need to know about who Mack is, what you do, how do you do it, and then we're just going to dig in and start asking some questions.
First off, I'm going to start using great at all things collaboration in like my bio. I'm going to steal that from you.
I think you should.
I've never heard that before.
Yes.
I love that.
It's a new resume term.
Yes. I receive all of that. My name is Mack. I am a worship pastor leader from Charlotte, North Carolina. Lived here for a long time, man. 17 years now. Been married to my wife for 18 years. We have 3 kids, 2 bio kids, 1 son that we adopted recently through the foster care system. And so we're just out here doing our thing, just surviving, living, enjoying life.
I love it. I am going to bring up the confusion that I had with Macklemore and Mack just because I think it's funny. And I think people need to know that Mack is Mack Macklemore is Macklemore. Years ago,
True.
I started hearing you on the radio and I was like, man, this guy has a voice. He's really good. And then someone had showed me a Macklemore song and I was like, why is this dude trying to be in both worlds? The only connection you guys have is the first half of your name. But I just think it's funny. And I'm like, I got to plug it because we all have those moments. We're like, but I have found that after I started really digging into what you do and listening to your music and watching you, it wasn't until 2 years ago that I found that you also were in the adoptive side with your son. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with that? As a former foster youth, it's always interesting to hear people's stories, but you started doing worship with Jamie at the Field conference. So we're going to plug that in too.
Yes.
But how did you get started with that? And how did you start building collaborations with people just kind of bleeding out? So how did you get started with the foster care stuff? And then how did you get started with collaboration with worship?
Yeah. Have you been to the Field conference before?
No, I was supposed to go last year and had a massive panic attack at the airport. And Jamie's like,
Really?
It's okay, girl. And I was like, I'm going home. And I'm like, I can't even get on the plane. It was the worst. It was the first time I traveled in 4 years. And it was the first time I was going to be away from my daughter, who we just had a year, less than a year before that. But I'm going this next year. I'm really excited.
I'll be back.
So, yay, sweet. I'll be over there and be like, that's my friend.
Yes.
But Field is such a great conference. So go ahead and plug that because I think it's so beautiful what they're doing there.
I got to say, just real quick, to plug, props to Jamie and Field conference.
Yes.
My wife first went maybe 3 years ago. And this is when we were early on in our foster care journey. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of at the point of I don't know if we're cut out for this. I don't know if we can do this, if we're built this for this. Yeah. And the Field conference, legitimately, not exaggerating, was a lifesaver for her and for us. One, just being around other moms that are going through the same thing, and having that community, but then also having tangible resources. So I just have to say real quick, Field conference is so special and it's the real deal. Jamie's awesome.
Yes, I love it.
Get plugged into that. It's amazing.
100%. And it's the resources that are she puts so much time and effort into the resources. But I think someone who, I went through the foster care system myself, I took in my siblings. I even messaged her. I was like, is this even for me? Because they're all adults now. And she's like, girl, do you feel like you just need to be around people who understand what this system
Right.
is like? And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, yes, because I'll be at lunch and be like, trauma. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
like,
It's literally
hey.
just even that, just being around other people that just have an understanding. And because,
Yes.
you know, even I grew up, my dad's a pastor. And
Mm,
so I grew up around a lot of like heavy situations. And one of the
right.
things that my dad always taught me, or just like always shared with me, like if he was with a family that was in grief or in mourning or
Mm,
like in like a super heavy season, he's like, most of the time, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to provide solutions. You don't have
yeah.
to give direction.
Listen.
Just to be present with them is
Mm,
so important. And that's kind of what a lot of like, you know, our foster community is like, is sometimes it's
yeah.
just like having somebody that also has been in it is like special and powerful.
We have like a I've noticed there's sometimes that we'll be sitting in a room, and if there's somebody else who's dealt with the system is in the room and someone says something and we just go, people are like,
Right.
I already know. I already
Yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly.
So I love that you
So
flagged that. So
back to your
yes,
original question.
go ahead, take it off.
We kind of got into foster care. It was honestly, it was a big thing on my wife's heart.
Mm,
She, she didn't grow up in foster care system, but my wife kind of, she has an amazing story, but a crazy story. You'll
mm,
have to have her on the podcast at some point.
yes, let's bring her
But
on.
long story short, when she became a Christian at like 17, she moved in with a family that
Mm,
kind of took her in, and it wasn't through the system or anything like that. It was kind of like a, hey, you need to get
mm,
out of your current situation.
yeah.
Come stay with us for a bit. A bit turned into 6 years, and they had a
Oh
massive
wow.
impact on her life and
Oh,
directing her
that's
life and teaching
beautiful.
her one how to become an adult, how to become like a believer, how to walk with Jesus, all that stuff.
Mm,
And so it really changed her life. And so uh, I think foster care in general has always been on my wife's
yeah,
radar.
yeah,
It was something that terrified me like crazy. I was very,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I'm cut out to do that. And I was very honest with
You do
her. And
you.
yeah, yeah,
Don't
I was
know.
like, let's find some other ways that
Yeah,
we can support them without
right. Get it.
doing the
Yeah,
dirty work. Uh,
yeah. It's a lot.
but I committed to reading the books,
Mm,
and I committed to going to the classes and doing all the training. And even through that process, um, a lot of my fears were quieted. And
mm,
that's not to take away with just the craziness of it all. It's a crazy world, but
right.
a lot of like the things that scared me the most, uh, just became less and less in my heart, and my heart
Mm,
like really changed towards the foster care system and foster youth and
yeah,
kids that are in the system that need, you know, that need families and need
yeah.
support and need just stability, some sort of stability in their lives. And so we got licensed in 2020, and our
Oh,
first placement came like 6 months. So yeah, we got licensed as the world was shutting down, and then
I'm
our
so
first
sorry.
placement
Yeah.
came that summer, and that was our son that we wound up adopting.
Mm,
And so it was quite a long journey, but
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the short version of it.
So I want to ask this because it kind of comes into collaboration is how with what you do with music,
Yeah,
how do you do that with having a family? Like how like that is such a hard thing. Like I struggle with that a lot where I'm just like, man, I feel so tired. But I know that
right.
this means so it's a lot to go and do this. This is where God's called us to be, or this is our passion, our purpose, what we find in life. How do we start to say, like, okay, this is where I need to pull back in seasons and when I can
Yeah,
go forward in seasons. And then we can jump straight into like building like building places that we can collaborate people with well, that
yeah.
can't even. It's fine.
To answer your first question about like how do you
Yeah, let's do
navigate
that.
all this stuff, you know, like that's like that's one of the hardest things that I've had to learn in life, is to
Yeah,
navigate the busyness of life and the
yeah,
chaos of life, and it only gets crazier and it only gets
it
busier.
does. Yeah.
And for many years, I was really bad at managing that, and so I was
Mm.
constantly on the like right on the verge of burnout. I was
Mm-hmm.
constantly right, like me and my wife were missing each other all the time. Like we were
Mm.
kind of two ships in the night, just like
Yeah, yeah.
getting through life. And that was because I was like a bad time manager. And
Mm.
about I don't know, probably like 10 years ago, I realized that I needed to make like some significant changes in the
Yeah.
way that I structured my life.
Right.
And I'm not a super, I'm not crazy self-disciplined in the sense of like, so every morning I wake up at this time and this is my routine. And this is like, that's not the way that I work.
Yes.
But what I have gotten really, really good at is just planning and managing like my calendar. And
Mm-hmm.
me and my wife joke a lot. Like we have calendar meetings literally all
Oh,
the
I love
time.
them. Oh my gosh.
Like, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we have one at least once a week, but usually it's like multiple times throughout the week, sitting down and be like, hey, real quick, let's hit the calendar for this week. Just
Yes.
because, like, one, we've got three kids that all
Yes.
have different pickup times and different events that they got to go to and activities. And I travel a lot with work. My wife
Mm-hmm.
runs a ministry here in Charlotte, so she's really busy too. And so it's just like a lot. But
Yeah.
when we sit down and we lock down, like, all right, Monday and Tuesday, here's what's going on with
Yeah.
me, here's what's going on with you. I feel like there's like an expectation. So
Mm.
much of like my burnout came from like an unexpected, oh, wait, I didn't realize that I'm so busy this week. Or I didn't
Yeah.
realize that I'm so, like,
That's my problem.
I'm traveling three times in the next, 2 weeks, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
kind of getting caught off guard that like messed up
Yes.
my brain and messed up my heart, and I started feeling like anxious and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But now I can like look at my calendar, I can see like, all right, here's the big picture of what's going on, here's what's going on this week. And it really like makes my days small to where like I'm conquering every day, doing the tasks at hand.
Yes.
Same with my
Oh,
wife. It helps my wife know like what's her expectation of me going into a busy
yeah.
season or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that calendar management, that's been like my biggest win over the last
I love
several
that.
years. Just syncing up and making sure I know what's going on in my life,
Yeah.
and just being intentional with it,
I love that.
and also knowing like with those calendar days, like we're also not a couple that has a consistent date night. Like every Thursday night is our date night. We don't have that because our life isn't conducive to that.
Right.
But I'm very well aware, like me and my wife have to have like intentional time together. And
Mm-hmm.
so whatever it might look like, sometimes it might just be like, hey, let's just hang on the front porch next
Mm.
Tuesday night or, whatever it
Yes.
means. Or sometimes it's a date night. Sometimes it's going out, but as long as like I'm being intentional with that time, like we stay connected, we stay in
Mm-hmm.
sync, and that's like a game changer for us too.
I feel like I'm a yes person, and my husband is so gracious because we've been together 7 years, married for 6,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
we started like I think like year 1. I was like, why are we? Because he was a worship director at the church we were at, and then now he's a tech director at the church we're at, and so it's like
Okay.
we do a lot of ministry stuff, and then I do a lot of speaking events. But there are those moments where I'm like, ugh. And then we had kids with my siblings, and then now we have a daughter, and so like year 1 we were like, man, this is not working, something's going on. And
Right.
I always worked full time, but I worked in like an 2-hour drive away, and so we synced our calendar together because technology is great until it goes down,
Right.
and then you're like, oh my god, what happened, where's our calendar? But we always still talk about it. We don't just put it down. We've always texted each other and then sat down and talked through, like, is this doable? And I'm a yes person, so I'm like, we'll figure it out. But I say yes too much.
Yeah,
And
same.
then like there was a week ago, like maybe 2 weeks ago, I was like, why am I, like, literally almost in tears on a Saturday being like, why am I so tired? And I had a feeling like, look in your calendar. And so I went
Right.
back and I counted out 14 meetings, like 10 different things that I was getting back to clients, emails, blogs, podcasts. And I was like, duh.
Right. I
But
know.
it's,
It's crazy.
if I had paused for a second and really looked at my calendar, I would have been able to, I think, say, no.
Right.
And I have learned over the years, like I used to be really bad where it was like I was saying yes so much that I wasn't even showing up to what I said yes to because I was so burned out. So I've
Right.
learned, like, okay, Monday and Fridays I'm blocking out from events or from appointments. And every foster parent I know is like, block out a day in the week. No
Yeah.
appointments, no schedules, no nothing outside of school, just rest. And I'm like, rest is so good, but we often look at rest as laziness.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how
If
do
there's
we
one thing,
shift? Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna piggyback off of that. Like, yeah, that rest part and like self-care is kind of
Yeah,
like the
it's not
go-to phrase now,
laziness.
but that's not like a bad thing. And
No.
I've learned just even for myself, like what are the small little ways that I can recharge, even if it's just
Yes.
listening to a podcast that I like, or
Yes.
watching Seinfeld, like
Or
something
listening to
as
Mack
basic as watching.
You like
Yeah.
listen to your own music.
But I'm just saying, like, just any small little thing. Like I've
Yeah.
learned, like, oh, I just need like a quick recharge. I just need a quick little
Yes.
like something. It doesn't always have to be like, a big vacation day or something like that.
Yeah.
It can just be like little things, and those things are important because those, I'm a high bandwidth person. My wife is a super high bandwidth person.
Right.
But if we're not doing any of the things to like recharge our spirit or recharge
Yes.
like our
Yes.
minds, whatever it might be, then we're gonna just constantly be in that red, of like
Yeah.
revving out all the time.
And if you don't even know, you're like, I don't know if I'm in red. You're probably in red. Like I
Right.
think you're
Yeah.
stressed out.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I love that you also said like there is everybody's so different. You might not have a same date night. Some people need that to be like, okay, Thursdays is when I look forward
Right.
to that. Thursdays when we're going to get together. But you're like, hey, that doesn't work for me and my wife. Like we sometimes it's outside sitting on the porch talking. Sometimes it is going out and unplugging away from home.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is vacation, but I know that so many times when I hear someone say stuff like, oh, we just take 6 vacations a year, I'm like, how do you even afford that? But you saying like sometimes it's just unplugging with my wife on the porch. I'm like, me and my husband do that like consistently throughout the week as well. We'll just sit down and we've just talked about
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm always like, oh, okay, I feel good. Even
Right.
when those late nights are late and those early mornings are early. I mean, our daughter is 2, so it's like we have been in the thick of it of toddler
Yes.
life and
Early,
infant life.
early.
And we early, and I'm like, man, but I'm like, teenagers are a little bit easier, but I'm like, man, I don't even know how to do this. Like, but it's simple things. And I think that's where you can say yes better. So how
Yeah.
when you're looking at putting something on the calendar, I think this is really important. And you, especially for some people who might be starting off a relationship with someone who's also like they have their own thing, because your wife has a ministry. Can you plug her ministry real
Yeah.
quick? What does she
Yeah.
do?
So she runs a ministry called Proverbs 31. It's like women's ministry. They do like a lot of like online Bible studies, online content
I've
stuff.
been following that for years.
Really?
How did I not know
Yeah.
this?
It's like the First Five app is like a big thing where it's like a
Yes.
morning Devo app. Yeah.
So good. Oh,
Yeah.
so good. Okay, so she's also someone who it's not just like here's cookies. Like she is running a full-fledged
She
ministry,
she's busy.
and
Yeah.
she's a word I'm not going to say. Like she's awesome. Like I couldn't see the other one that came to mind. Trying
Yeah.
here. Jesus is working on me. But I love that because it really shows there's 2 working parents, there's kids in the house, there's it's not. I want to say this because I think this is a little bit different. There is the 9 to 5 job that is completely difficult already.
Right.
Then you have the entrepreneur person.
Right.
And that is really hard because that's where a lot of what we do is banked on getting income coming in as an entrepreneur. It's not easy
Right.
to be someone like a musician or a keynote speaker or a motivational speaker because it's not consistent.
Yeah.
So where do you kind of have to tell yourself, this is a no for me. I cannot say
Yeah.
yes to this, and not fear the income side.
Right. Yeah. That you saying like you're a yes person. Like I'm such a yes person too. Like
So bad.
I don't like I can be a people pleaser. I want to make sure everyone's taken care of, and whatever I can do, I want to help.
People have given
And
me
so
books
I
like you need to work on yourself. I'm like,
right. I'm the same.
so
And yeah,
yeah,
and then that coupled with every time you're saying no, that's like you can kind of calculate, well, that's income loss or that's, not getting this opportunity, whatever it might be.
yeah,
And for a long time, like I carried that. And so I felt like I had to
yeah.
say yes. I felt, all this stuff. And I think, I don't know, there's a couple of things. One, I realized from a very tangible standpoint, like
Mm,
I could not sustain that. And so
yeah,
even recently, like I got asked to do an event. I have the date free, but when I looked at the big picture calendar, I told Meredith, I was like, I really, really want to be a part of this. I really want to do this, but I think that I'm going to be in the middle of this like chaotic season, and that's going to be like the one, almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. That's like the
yeah.
right over the edge, and so I had to decline it and say like let's find another date or
I
let's
love you,
hopefully we can do
but
something
yeah,
in the future. Um, And so that's like the tangible aspect. That's just like the
Yeah.
physical, like I have to take care of certain things that I know about myself and be on the lookout for
Mm.
that. And then from a spiritual perspective, I really have had to learn and am still learning that like my future, my finances,
Mm.
my opportunities are not caught up in anything that I can do. And any
Mm.
that includes anything that I say yes to or anything that I'm like pursuing or running after.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
have to let that go. I have to live open-handed to the Lord and to really
Mm.
realize like I can look back and see the Lord season after season after season has come through for our family, has been kind to our family, has been consistent with our family. And if I've seen him do that before, I really do need to like trust that
Yeah.
he will do that again. Meredith just sent me, Meredith's my wife. She just sent me like this Instagram clip. I wish I could remember the speaker's name, but it was a lady and she was preaching
Mm-hmm.
about being relaxed
Mm-hmm.
in Jesus.
Okay.
And just the kind of the most simple basic part of her uh, point was that we trust Jesus with the eternity of our souls.
Mm.
Like at the end of the day, I have no problem having faith that when I die,
You're
my soul
good.
is secure.
You're good.
I'll be
Yeah.
with the Lord. Like I have so much faith in that,
Mm.
and yet I still struggle. Like so, I'm trusting the Lord with the eternity of my soul, and yet I still struggle with trusting the Lord with like my day to day
Yeah.
here on earth.
Yeah.
And that was such a challenging thing of like, man, why do I do that? Why do I feel the need to control a
Yeah.
situation or to put stuff in my, in my own, uh,
Oh man. Yeah.
yeah, my own control, like
Yeah.
however I can like gain control of it. And I'm learning to let go of that. And I'm learning to just be
Yeah.
open handed with the Lord and kind of just trusting that I don't have to, one, say yes to everything, but I also
Yeah.
don't have to like stress
Yeah.
about
Oh,
everything
yeah.
that comes along with
I
that.
think it's so crazy because when you said it, like it kind of like hit me, and I was like, "Oh, like I've been in counseling for a year, and I'm gonna probably plug this until I'm not in counseling anymore." But she says that sometimes there's things that hits our wounds, but I think
Hmm.
there's also things that can hit us where it's confirmation of like you
Yeah.
get this now, and you hit something in a confirmation way. I'm like, I'm gonna leave and be like, Mac Brock hit my hurt. It's like no, you actually hit a confirmation for me because it
Yeah.
kind of ties me back to they're in what I do with advocacy, and so many others can relate to this. I think is that I go, oh my God, but what if I don't say yes to this? Like literally, I'm like crying out, like God, if I say no to this, am I going to miss the next opportunity? Am I going to miss? Like, are they going to look at me and be like, oh, she's not serious, she doesn't want this? And you're like, dude, there is nothing you can do that's going to
Yeah.
hinder that outside of not showing up well. And there
Right.
was something that happened when I was a youth leader when I had my siblings in, and I kept rescheduling with the kids that I was youth leading because I was just so done and burned out. I kept saying yes to everything. And one of the parents pulled me aside and he's like, Dee, we've been friends for a long time. I love you. And I know you're in a hard season, but you're hurting my kid.
Mm.
And it was such a raw, and he did it in such a beautiful like way that it wasn't just straightforward, but he also knew he could be that straightforward.
Yeah.
And I was like, I am so sorry. He's like, you are good at a lot of things right now. And he's like, but the yeses are actually there. You're showing up kind of like 50%.
Yeah.
And he
Wow.
goes, and I was like, I know. And he's like, what you're not seeing though is even though my kid's saying she's okay and it doesn't bother her and she understands, it is hurting her. And I
Yeah.
felt so bad. And I ended up like pulling her aside and I'm like, I am so sorry. But she's like, no, it's okay. I was like, no, it's not okay. And that I keep
Mm.
doing that. And I need to stop doing that to you. And it just
And
that
can,
thing where he said, like, you're showing up 50% of the time when you're saying
right.
yes versus saying no and showing up well to the things you are saying yes to. And I was like, so that keeps coming through my head right now. I'm like, oh, the only way that I can ruin this is by saying yes to everything and not showing
Right.
up well to those things. And that's crazy to me to think through.
And we've even learned, just tying it even back to foster care, we've learned that that even applies when we've gotten calls about placements. And
Mm,
that's one of the hardest things, but uh like it's so difficult to get a phone
yeah,
call, to pray through it and to say, I don't think that this is a good fit, or I don't think that like we
right.
can say yes to this. that's really difficult to do, but it has been so important to like even be open-handed in that for us.
Yeah.
And that was something that scared me early on in the foster care process of thinking like, well, I'm just gonna have to say yes to every single call that we get, and
Right.
you know,
Right.
it's that's scary and overwhelming. And I've learned that no, there are certain situations that other people are going to be a lot more qualified than me to care
Right.
for this child or to care for this sibling group. And it's okay for
Mm,
me to know my limits. It's okay for me and my wife to know our family's limits and to
right.
say like, hey, the season that we're in, we're not the best fit right now. You know,
Yeah.
and that's kind of like it's
That's a
difficult,
good point.
but it's
Yeah.
been such um a good thing for us to even like witness how the Lord continues to work in those kids' lives and through
Yeah.
the system.
I think it's just, it comes back to the red. Like, okay, you think that you're helping. So I know a ton of people, like even foster care or not foster care, it's just like, oh, I thought I was helping. And it's like, but ask yourself, when you sit in that conversation with the person, are they going to say, I see what you did well? Or are they going to say,
Right.
like, I wish you would have said no,
Yeah.
because there could have been someone else who could have done it better for that season, and we would have just done a different season for that schedule,
Right.
or a
Yeah.
different kid who would have maybe fit a little bit better. Because, like, there are kids, it's like when you say yes in the foster care system, there's things like there are siblings groups where it's like, okay, we're needing you to take 3 kids in, and one of them might have medical issues or maybe a lot of appointments or wants to be in sports, and you're like, yeah, we're going to say yes to every kid who comes through. And then you're drowning and you're like, well, sorry, you
Right.
can't be in that sport. And then you took the one thing that they had
Right.
away
Right.
because you're in red. And it's like, dang, like if I would have could step back for a second and say, like, is this a season to take in a 3 sibling group? No, but there's a family who can. And I
Right.
stopped them from that opportunity of doing well by that. This same thing,
Yeah.
if like when you collaborate with people for music or church stuff, like to do worship, it might be like a season where you're like, yes, that day's open, but that week is
Right.
not necessarily open. And then you come in and you're like, oh, okay, I don't really care about it. Like they're just like, oh, he's really nice, but like he came in and like he didn't even sing. Like we're paying him
Right.
kind of, we're
He was
paying him
on
to be
empty.
here.
Yeah.
He was on
Right.
empty the whole time. And then, I noticed like some I have like RBF. People know what that is, so I don't need to like explain RBF. But there was a time where people were like, you just didn't even look like you wanted to be here. And it wasn't that they wanted me on the whole time, but they were like, you were just not even approachable. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I'm on burnout. And they're like, I get that, but like we're paying you to be here. And I'm like,
Right. Right.
oh no. Like I didn't have the energy to even check my face for a second. And I'm like, I sit
Right.
back and I'm like, oh, that would have prevented that ugly conversation if I
Yes.
had just like, I had the day open, but what did
Right.
the week look like? And I think that looking out, that is such a beautiful thing to say. What does your week look like? Because that does prevent the burnout side of things. So
Yep.
if you are already in burnout, what do you do? Because I think that's like preventing burnout. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. But like, how do we, if we're in burnout, what can we start doing to take things off our plate without having that fear? Like, I think hands wide open for the finance aspect. But what do we
Right.
do to help condense the fear that we might be feeling when we have to say, I'm so sorry, but I have to get this off my plate?
Yeah. I think, it was about 10 years ago that I came to that like really close to the edge of like burnout of like,
Mm,
I can't do this anymore in ministry. I gotta like figure out something else. Um, and so I can only really speak from my experience, what I
yeah.
did. But I think the biggest adjustment that I made in my life outside of like like time management and just like, calendar management
Yeah.
was that I really like looked at all the things that were on my plate, all the things that I
Mm-hmm.
was doing for the ministry I was working for, and I narrowed it down like, here are all the things that I'm doing. What are the things that only I can do?
Right.
What are the things that I am kind of like called and anointed to do?
Ooh.
What are the things that I will kind of be the best person for? And then what are the
Yeah.
things that I'm just like carrying because I've always carried it? Or what are the things that um, there's someone else that's like waiting in the wings to step into this role, but because I've always done it, I haven't allowed them the chance to step into that? Or what are the
Yeah.
things that there were so many things that I just assumed that I was the best at, and I assumed nobody would do it as good as me. And that just wasn't the case. Um,
Dropping
Now
knowledge.
that's, you know, I say that with the caveat of like in a job, in a ministry,
Right.
in whatever we do, there's always going to be things that you have to do that you don't like
Right.
always. There will
Right. You don't
never
have to
be
do it
like,
all.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you don't have to do it all. And so for me, I literally made a list of like all those things that I just talked about.
Mm.
And I started to see like, okay, I can hand this off to somebody. I've got this
Mm.
person on my team who's like great in this area, but I just haven't allowed them the chance to step into this leadership role. And so
Yeah.
I'm going to raise them up to do that. And so when I went to my supervisor and was like, hey, here's kind of where I'm at. I'm like really, really struggling. I even went like with my solutions already kind of ready in place
Yeah.
instead of being like, hey, I need you to solve this problem for me because I'm about to be burnt out and I need you
Yeah.
to fix it. I came in and said, hey, I'm like really, really struggling. I'm barely surviving. So here are the things that I'm suggesting that I do to like help. And that's when I started making changes in my life and making changes in my work. And
Yeah.
honestly, like looking back,
Mm.
this is such like a small example. If you're a musician, you'll get this. So like one of the things that I did every week was I was still planning like our set list for Sunday, but I was charting out every like from song to song to song. Here's how we're going to get
Mm.
into it. Here's how like it's going to feel to the band. I was doing all that stuff because I thought like I would be no one would care about it as much as me.
Yeah.
And literally like the month after I handed it off to someone else, they got a whole new software. They started doing things at an
Yeah. Because they're like,
entirely
oh,
different
he's.
level that I was like bottlenecking, but they like stepped into it and brought it
Yeah.
up like, 10 times as good as I did it. And it just took me getting my hands off of it.
Yeah.
And so I think like finding those things, finding like what are the kind of non-negotiables in my life of like what I'm, like I said, called to do, anointed to do, that I'm like the best at. And I want to
Yeah.
focus my energies on that. And then what are the things in my life that I can either like let go or hand off to somebody else. And it's not always going to be that easy. You're not always going to have like someone waiting in the wings to do your administrative work,
Right.
or
Right.
but if there are things that like people in your life or people on your team that you can start handing stuff off to, and there's like an
Yeah.
interest and a desire, like that's so key.
It is, and it's something that like, so I own my own little business, and I do a lot of coaching for like doctoral students, and then I do these speaking events. And there's a phrase that one of I used to, when I was in my early 20s and like trying to figure out life, I worked underneath a pastor as an admin, just like as free time.
Right.
And he had said like, if we don't know where the holes are, like sometimes we have to step back and we have to let the thing fall down, let that task fall down, let that position kind of fall to see if we even need the position, to see if we
Yeah.
even need
Wow.
that task to be done. And so there's times in my business that I'm like, do I even need that service? Like
Yeah.
why is it listed if it's more frustrating for me to do and causing me more heartache or kind of empty time, that is just busy work. And there was a lady I was listening to who was like, look, if you're going to be poor, you don't want to be busy. And so I was like, oh, so I don't want to be poor busy. Like if I'm going to be poor, I'd rather be poor and just be with my family versus being
Right.
poor and busy, to where it's like, well, why
Wow.
can't I enjoy life? But I'm always busy. And it's like, but are you busy doing the right things? And
Yeah. So good.
that's where it's like, okay, if I'm unsure if I want to say yes or no to this, let it drop. Don't offer it. See what, like, how many more people are requesting it. If it's one person every year and it's a thing that you're like, I don't want to do this, take it off your plate. Just let it
Yeah.
go. But if you don't
Yeah.
let it have room to breathe, to see if it's even necessary to have, then maybe it's time to not have it on your plate at all. And I
Right.
think with advocacy and like collaboration with what you do is like, maybe there's some people that you like, I've come to recognize this as like, maybe there's some conversations with people where it's like they're taking it and they're like, oh, you're going to do all these things. And that's when you have to say, hold on, let's I love the ideas. Let's back up a little bit though.
Yeah.
I can give you this
Right.
of that. As if you want, it kind of does come down to money, where it's like, oh, we want you for a whole weekend. And it's like, I have to come back to the budget. What is your budget? Oh, we have
Right.
this. Okay, this is what I can give for that because of what the budget is. I want to still do this with you and for you, but if you want all weekend, that's a different price point because it's
Right. Right.
protecting your schedule and it needs to be able to cover everything. So
Yeah.
when it comes to like let's jump into the collaboration piece is like how do you build healthy networks with people to where you can say I like we can have a healthy conversation on like no this like this I can't say yes to that. What would be
Yeah.
your advice there?
So collaboration, that is like everything that I do. You know, every
Right.
song that I write is a
Yeah.
collaborative song. When I'm in
Right.
ministry, you know, playing with
It's
bands,
always.
it's a collaboration with all the musicians. Um, and I think for me, I guess I'll answer your first question about like keeping that balance, like keeping
Yeah.
that those boundaries in place, you know? I think that that's just like a personal thing, like of me understanding myself, me
Right.
understanding like I can't say yes to every songwriting session. I can't say,
Right.
you know,
We'd
and
love
that's
to.
hard
It's
for
just
me
not
too.
conducive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's hard for me too, but like I've had
I
to learn.
bet.
This like a small example is during COVID and all that, everybody was writing on Zoom. And that became like a
I
really
saw that.
almost like a sweet thing because like I'm writing with my friends in LA and I'm in Charlotte, North
Right.
Carolina, and it gave us a chance to write when normally we would just wait till we were in person. So that was like for a
Yeah.
season, that was how we did things. Then hit a
Seems
season,
like
you
it's
know, where you
coming
start
now.
doing like in-person songwriting and all that stuff kind of comes
Right.
back. But I kept scheduling all these Zoom writes and they became less and less inspired. And every time I would be in them, it
Mm.
would be like very draining, and I'm not with them, and there's not an energy in the room, and it just felt like a slog, to where I was just like in songwrite after songwrite with zero fruit to show for it because
Mm.
it wasn't productive for me. And
Yeah.
so recently, I just kind of had to be like, hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've just got to say no to like Zoom writes because I'm not seeing the fruit from it, and it's not helping me. Maybe it will again one day,
Yeah.
but for this season, maybe it's me. I'm in a in a rut or whatever, but I've just got to say no to those. Um,
Yeah.
and it you know it kind of sucks to say no, but it's been like a good boundary for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And I still go to Nashville, or I still have people come to Charlotte. We still write in person. It's just
Mm.
that one area had to say no to.
Right.
Um, I think the other thing about collaboration that I just want to speak to that I was really bad at when I first started in ministry, you know, in my early
Mm.
20s, is it is so easy for us to get caught up in what does this person have to offer me and what my goals are,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And especially as a worship leader, when you're trying to build a band and you're trying to build, you know, a worship team, it was so easy to be like, all right, I need a drummer, I need a guitarist, I need a
Right.
keys player. You are that to me. Like you are serving this purpose for me. And
Yeah.
it almost stopped, our relationship stopped at that. And
Mm.
I would be playing with people on the weekends and just like kind of be totally disconnected from their lives.
Yeah.
And I had such, you know, the Lord like convicted me so strong about that, about one, like serving with these people and leading worship with these people that I was so disconnected to in life. And so I really like
Mm.
changed my perspective on like pretty much all collaboration that I do now, or, you know, songwriters that I know, or producers that I work with, or worship teams that I play with. Like we're doing a task together. Like we are, you know, we're working together and
Yeah.
we're trying to
This
be
is
productive
ours
and
together.
moving. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is our thing that we're working towards. But I care way more about the relationship and about who you are as a person and about what the
Mm.
Lord is doing in your life than I do about the outcome of what we might get. And there are so many times, well, I just had
I
to
love that.
lead, you
Yeah.
know, the way that I live, like I have to lead from that perspective. And so, uh, it's a lot of checking in on people. It's a lot of like just relationship building and making sure that
Mm.
like the people in my life know that I care about them as like a human and as a
Yeah.
person more so than them as like a songwriter that can help me fix this chorus that I'm working on, you know,
I'm
whatever
having
it
so
might
many
be.
epiphanies right now. I'm like, oh my God, that was what, okay. So, what in my head, like, as you're collaborating with people, like, you went from this is how I've seen it happen on the other side, where it's like, oh, okay, you can do high harmonies. I sing and I
Right.
play guitar, I play acoustic, and it's like, well, I can't use you today. I don't need you. Not, we don't say, oh, I can't use you. We say like, oh, I don't need you this Sunday.
Right.
But between this Sunday and 6 months from when you do need me, there's no like, hey, Danisha, how are you? What's going on?
Right.
And then it's like, and then I'm scheduled, and it's like, I think we have this relationship of like, hey, me and Mac are good. Like, but then it's like, I feel missed in that 6 months where it's like, hey, bro, like, I love you, want to help you, but like, I told you that this season was really horrible. And you're like, when did you tell me that? And
Right.
it's just because you're the best way I think to put that is more of like, you're agenda focused versus person focused. Is just, I
Yeah.
have to fill this space right now, and that totally understand when that happens. Like,
Yeah.
that has to be really hard to be like, I have to have 7 people on stage and I need every single space filled. My husband used to do that a lot, but he was really good at the relational piece to be like, oh, I haven't heard from so and so in 2 weeks, and I'm like, he's made for ministry. That's what he does. And I'm like, what? I don't know how to describe how it is. And it's like, no, it's that he sees the people first.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see the agenda first. So
Right.
this is where in advocacy, I can see this happening with a lot. I'm like, what is happening in our foster care advocacy world is that there are 2 types of people, that some of us are building relationships and some of us are building agenda. And our agenda sometimes looks like, I need to go out and get this on my calendar. I need to go out and make sure I'm financially okay. So the only time I reach out to you is when I need something. I need an event. I need a recommendation or a person, versus like, hey, you're actually my friend first. And that's what you're saying is like, I need to know that my friend is good first, because then the collaboration piece, we could make SpongeBob SquarePants songs and it'd be like, woo, we were so proud of this, versus like, we just did this really cool, amazing masterpiece. And all of us are like, I can't stand you because you don't even see me. And
Right.
that, like, you step back, you're like, oh my God, like, I
And
did not mean
so,
to do that.
and I guess for me, I just want to make sure that I am not that person.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yeah.
make sure I have also learned to try to live in grace for the people that are like that.
Yes.
Just because I know,
Yeah.
for the most part, there's not any sort of like malicious intent or
No,
anything. A lot of times it's just kind of like off their radar. They're just not thinking about it.
they're
And so I
usually
can
in a
only
place of stress too. Like,
I
that's
can
what I've
only
noticed.
I can only control myself, and I can only
Yeah.
control the way that I um treat people and see people.
Yeah.
And so yeah, if I want to lead from a relationship first.
Yeah.
Um and I don't have like this, I don't have like so here's my system for how I do that. I just try to, make sure I like know for the people in my life that I work
Yeah.
with, or the people in my life that I even see just once or twice a year at conferences or whatever. I want to know like what's going on in their life, and I want to make sure that at the very least that they feel seen by me at
Yeah.
some, even if it's at like a small level.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take, because I'm also very well aware, like going back to all the burnout and the busyness and all that stuff, like I can't be everybody's best friend. I can't like go out to coffee
No.
and
Yeah.
lunches
Yeah.
and meals and everything all the
Sorry,
time with
everybody.
people.
He's not
Yeah, like
available.
it's just like
It's
it's
just not possible.
impossible.
It's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But sending a text is easy. Making a
Yeah.
phone call is quick. And there are just like lots of little things to make sure like
They're good. Yeah.
I'm loving somebody for who they are and in their lives more than I'm loving them because they're a really good drummer or a really good songwriter, and that's important.
And I think the thing that it's just like, I don't know why that's an epiphany in my brain, because it's like, it makes sense, but I think it's that putting words to what we see. And people who are more agenda focused, I'm an agenda focused person, and normally when I miss the mark is when I'm in burnout. And so it's like,
Right.
if I want to prevent the burnout, though, I need to first calendar this out. I need to really look at my week. But in order to see other people maybe in their burnout, me just sending a text and just be like, hey, I just want to check in on you. It's been a while. Haven't heard from you. That can feel like a lot to do as well. But if it's like you're in my team, like if I can't speak to 100 people every single day, but a
Right.
text is easy. Looking like if they've like, I mean, I can't be on social media all day. I have a job, but it is that like, okay, are you in, I hate to say this, MySpace days, are you in my top 20?
Right.
Like I think I can connect and be like, okay, like I'm gonna not always call all my 20, but maybe there's a top two that it's like, hey, I'm working on this project and it's going to take us the next year. I don't want to just check in on you and say, hey, how's the deliverables going? Like,
Right.
I want
Yeah,
to
totally.
know you and know that you're
Yeah.
okay, because we, especially as I think as creatives, as musicians, depression and anxiety is often high because it comes with
Mm,
it. Just kind of, that's a kind of a thing of, so if you're creative, we've just noticed that is where burnout is high,
yes.
anxiety and depression is high, because it is more of like what I put out. I believe in it so much, but not a lot of people see it. So if you
Right.
get seen in the midst of that, it's easier to say like, hey, how can I help you? I might not have the solution. I might not have the counselor. I might not have the a day to go to lunch, but what I do have is the means to send a text that's 2 seconds,
Yeah.
just to,
Right.
okay, do you need a phone call? Okay, what does my week look like?
But
Versus,
also your heart towards them, like, even
yes,
if you're bad at like the actionable things, like, is your heart towards them still like
yeah,
for who they are, as a person more than like the things that they have to
absolutely.
offer?
And I think that it can get really hard for people who are pastors and worship leaders and advocates, because there are days that we first have to take care of ourselves, because there's going to be those moments of those conversations. Everybody, people, I'm sure people message you what's going on in their life, emails, Instagram, like in church,
Yeah.
and you're just like, this is a lot. So it's like you also have to have people to tap into to say, hey, I need a conversation too. So it's not just
Yeah.
always like, how can you take on everything? It's like, where is that healthy no of like, hey, right now, like I had a friend who like texted me, she's like, hey, can you do a phone call? And I was like, hey, can we do tomorrow? Like, I have no mental space. And she's like, absolutely. Because in that, I was like, I'm not going to listen well. And I
Right.
just know, because I'm already like, I'm there myself. But she also had the understanding that it wasn't personal. I was very honest with her. And I wouldn't have done that a year ago. I would have just been like,
Right.
yeah. But I was like, hey,
Right.
can we actually talk tomorrow? Like, I'm feeling it right now. And she completely understood that. So it's like
Yeah.
also being able to say, like, I care so much to listen to you that today is not a good day.
My wife used to make fun of me because she would be telling me something that I needed to do.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be like looking directly at her, but she just knows that everything she is saying to me is just like going
Yeah.
over my head because my
Yeah.
mind is like elsewhere. And it used to like frustrate her because she would be like, "No, I told you to do this." I'm like, "I have no recollection of that."
I do that with
And
my
now,
husband.
now she just realizes, like, as she's talking to me, she'll be like, "Hey, I could tell you're not at like the mental space to receive what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
either like check in real quick or like let's talk later tonight."
Yeah, my husband will do that. He's like, "Hey, did you hear what I said?" And I'm like, and I've learned to not be like, "Yeah," because I used to be like so ashamed to be
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I heard you," and he's like, "No, you didn't." But
Oh,
now
I
I'm like,
still do
"Look,
that. I
my
still try to
brain,
fake it.
my brain. I've literally said multiple times throughout like the last 7 years where I'm like, my brain didn't process that. Can you say that again?" And then I've
Right.
had to learn that sometimes too is like just put the phone down and be able to say, yeah, hey, are we able to talk about this later? Like my brain is not processing. Like I'm feeling
Right.
overwhelmed. I don't want to always use the buzzwords of like, oh, I'm overstimulated, I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, sometimes my brain just doesn't want to process. But he did that yesterday. He's like, did you hear what I said? And I was like, no, what? Like, and he's just like, it's okay. But I can tell it's frustrating sometimes because it's like, I was like, if I have that, I'm like, oh, they didn't listen. But I'm like,
Right, I
he
know.
understands that it's like sometimes my brain is overwhelmed. So I do want to jump into um when we're collaborating, like I it's kind of natural in what you were saying, like, okay, we want to see the person, not just what they can give to us. That can actually turn into like almost using someone by accident. So
Yeah.
how do we prevent that? Because I think it's like it's really good to be like, hey, let's see you, but like how do you prevent accidentally being like, hey, I'm just kind of using you for what I need and then not seeing you again? Because that's how it can come across.
Yeah, I think it again, like I told you this before. It's funny you asking me these questions because I'm very much like, I don't really know. I
You
don't
do
have a
though.
PhD. I don't have a master's.
That's
I
not
just
about
know like
that.
what I
I'm
just
like,
know
you
what
have
I
like
do
20
in
years of
life.
experience in this. Like, I'm like, dude, you are a pro, man.
I've
You're good.
definitely had seasons where, yeah, and relationships that was very one-sided
Yeah.
of me needing a task or me needing something. And I
Mm,
do think I think one, just like being like aware of that in general
yeah.
is so key. Like just being aware of that and asking those questions, you're already like a step ahead. because like your mind is, you want to live in a loving way and not just like a selfish way. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for me, it just like goes back to that thing of like, I'm very well aware if I have like a relationship with somebody that the only time I'm talking or communicating to them is when I need something.
Yeah.
And it
Oh,
makes
and
me
we
feel like,
know.
yeah,
We
I
know.
know, and it makes me feel like gross and icky, and it's like a
Yeah.
chat, like a challenge. And so there are a lot of times that, I mean, I've had situations where it's like I do need to ask for something,
Right, right.
but I don't have I don't have the equity in the bank to be able to ask you that. Like I haven't like,
Yeah.
I need to not ask that. Like that's not appropriate
Yeah.
because of like our like I haven't been present, or whatever it might be.
Right.
And so I do think that it just goes back to like, I think that there are tangible actions, but I think it's more so just like the mentality and like, you know, thinking about
Yeah.
people as like who they are and what's going on in
Yeah.
their lives and you know,
And
what
not
Jesus is
relying
doing
on
in their lives
social media.
and oh, for sure not, gosh, I mean, there's
I'm
so
like,
many of
oh
my
my
friends
God.
that like know that I'm just like, I'm not keeping up with them on socials. So
Good.
I'm going to ask them questions that I should know if I like followed their every move on socials. But,
But not everyone's
and that's
built
kind
that
of,
way
that can
either.
be
Yeah.
embarrassing at times, but for the most part, it's like, no, like I want to know, like, I want to have a conversation with you.
I
I
want
want
to
to know
have
like
the
what,
real conversation and not the
right.
real conversation that you posted.
Yes.
Like, but
Yes.
I think
Correct.
the good indicator too is like it just keeps popping in my mind is like when you go to text that person that you're thinking of asking for something, look at when the last dated text message you sent them was. Because if it was
Yeah.
a year ago and then you're like, hey, I'm
Right.
like, oh, hello, how are you? How am I, Danisha? Like I do that sometimes where I'm like, pick it up and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's good. It's that time again to hear from
I also
you.
think, I also think, one thing that's like important to me, or it's just at least like on my mind a lot, and I try to live this way,
Mm,
is like I want to serve people,
yeah,
and so I don't want to be the person that's like always asking for something, but like I want to be proactive in
yeah,
serving
yeah,
myself,
yeah,
serving them or do, helping in whatever way that I can, and I think that that also, and that looks different for every relationship
yeah.
and different in every like situation, but um that goes a long way in like
Mm,
if you in a collaborative almost like working environment or working
right,
situation. uh I want to serve people too. I want to
right.
like make myself available. I want to make myself available to them and do
Mm-hmm,
whatever I can do to help lift them up and push them forward,
right,
and so that kind of comes along with the territory, and I
right.
think doing that more and more and more when you need something in return, or not even in return, that's a bad way to put it, like just when you need their help, it's less
Yeah,
like using them,
yeah. It's
it
less.
does feel like
Oh,
that
Max back on
collaboration,
my
like it's all
phone.
together. Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
together.
It's like, oh, Mac needs like me for now. Like it's like
Right.
the superhero bat call. Where you're like,
Yes,
da,
right.
da, da, da. It's like, oh, I got you. That's a. I'm gonna figure out how to do that. That would be really weird and funny at the same time to get like a Mac Brock like let go of a bat call. But I think that that's such a healthy way to look at it though too. Is like it really. I think it comes back to like, okay, look at your text message. When was the last time you texted them? And if it's a year ago and it was last time, you're like, hey, bro, can you do me a favor? And it's
Yeah,
like, they're like, what's up? Like I think you feel with, especially with collaboration, you feel the dynamic as soon as you send that text message of like, oh,
right.
like, already in your heart. And like, if you really do want to serve people, people are also going to pull you into opportunities of like, hey, I thought of you because you're
Right.
always thinking
Yeah.
of me. Like, I want to think of you.
Yeah.
But it is not like, I think that this can also go into um overdrive where we're like we're always trying to help everybody. It's like where that's not, we don't always have to do that either. Like we could literally just be somebody's friend and answer their texts
Yeah.
and pray with them and be with them. We don't always have to give them the opportunity. That might come when it comes, but it's not like I'm plugging you every single time. But then there are people like that because they're very diverse in what they can do. But that might also stem into jealousy, especially when
Mm.
we see other people winning, or maybe we're like, man, I wish that person would have recommended me. So have you ever dealt with that, or maybe even walked someone else through that? Because I know you've worked with churches before too, and kind of being the person who is always waiting in the wing. It's like, how would you walk me through, like if I'm like, hey, I'm really like kind of pissed that I'm not getting these opportunities. And I am someone who's pouring into other people, and I'm always trying to
Yeah.
think of other people first. Like, how would you walk me through that kind of that emotion that you might be
And
feeling?
I think that in churches and in worship ministries and
Happens.
worship leaders and creatives, there's like a, I don't know if it's like an epidemic is the word, but
Kind
there's
of
just
is.
like a flood of like insecurity and
Yes.
comparison. And
Yes.
it's just like overwhelming, and it's coming at all fronts. Even if you're killing
Mm-hmm.
it, doing so good, there's always somebody that's doing it better than you.
Right.
There's always somebody that, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that is like such a disease in like
It's in
inside
the
of us.
advocacy world too.
Yeah,
100%.
it is
Yep.
it is so awful, and I see that all the time. And so one thing that I encourage worship leaders constantly, it's like my
Mm.
go-to, like if I could say anything to you, this is what I'd say to you, is like your identity is in the Lord. Your
Mm.
identity is not in the things that you do. It is not caught up in your accomplishments or your actions. Like
Mm.
you are who you are as your
Without all that
basic
other
self in the
stuff.
Lord without all that stuff.
Mm.
Now, on top of that, the Lord has a calling on your life. He has given you authority in your area, whatever it is that you're doing. If you're a worship leader on platform, leading God's people, like you have an authority to
Mm-hmm.
do that. You have a
Mm-hmm.
calling to do that. And so walk in that authority, be confident in that. Like
Mm.
if I can, whatever it is that you do, that's like your thing that like this is what the Lord has put in my heart and I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
That's the thing you should have so much confidence in.
Yeah.
And odds are that's one of the things that you have the most like insecurity about is because you are
Mm.
constantly striving and wanting to succeed and want to accomplish all these things. But walking in that confidence, like being confident in
Mm-hmm.
what the
Mm-hmm.
Lord has put in you is so key.
Yeah.
I also think like go back to like when you see someone else winning or someone else getting like,
Mm-hmm. It's so
whatever,
hard. Yeah.
that's so hard.
Yeah.
Not going to deny that. That is like difficult. Um, the times that I have felt that and the times that I have
Mm.
like had those pings of insecurity, a very easy, like tangible way for me to combat that in my own spirit, because the goal isn't, well, how do I get those opportunities? The goal is
Right.
like,
Right.
how do I have a healthy heart and a healthy
Mm-hmm.
mind?
Mm-hmm.
Is I try to become like a huge cheerleader for the person that
Yeah.
is succeeding and a huge fan of what they're doing and be an encouragement to them and be a blessing to them. And no, that is hard. That might not take away like the
Mm.
stress or the anxiety that I feel, but it can start to quell that, and it can start to
Right.
just remind myself like my worth isn't in that thing. My value
Yeah.
isn't in that thing. My
Yeah.
value is in the Lord. My value is in who I am in Christ and who I
Yeah.
am, like fearfully, wonderfully made. Like I can rest in that. And so that's like a small thing, I know. And
It's
that's like,
a big thing though, because it adds up. Because it
yeah,
definitely goes from, when you're sitting, I with all the advocates I've sat with, it's kind of like, we're in rooms with each other doing the exact same thing. We just do it differently. And I
yeah,
remember like kind of like I told someone before I started sharing my story, I'm like, yeah, but there's a lot of other people already doing that. And they're like, but Denisha,
right,
you have a reach. I'm going to plug her because her name's Jasmine Starr. She's an entrepreneur. And she was saying to like a collective group of us, like, even if someone does the exact same thing as you all bring something different to the table. You might say the
right.
exact same things differently, but you all have different reaches to other people. And God has
Yeah,
created that so uniquely as worship leaders and or people who are creatives that it's like, okay, he gave you something different, even if it looks the same. Like you both could be singing, sound the exact same, but the passion is something different because you're focused. God gave you a different focus.
yeah,
But if we don't start turning into a heart of cheerleading, it does become that when we hear that person's name, like, oh, we just did this and so is on it. And you're just like, oh, great. Like,
right. I know.
I've been there and I was like, oh, like, and I was like,
Yeah,
no,
I've
no,
got
like
it.
I should
Yeah,
cheer her on because also I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes to have gotten to that point. But like I might be doing the exact same thing as they did, and then I'm following in their blueprint and it's just not working for me. And someone's like, Denisha, it's God's timing, not your timing. And I was like, but I would love
Right.
that timing right now.
Yeah.
And I'm
It's
like,
just so easy to get in the mindset of like, we are the star of the world. Like we're the lead.
yeah.
We're the lead in this
Our
story.
agenda, not agenda, but like our go forward is more important than somebody else's. And it's like, but maybe God has you, like there's a concept of like, I've always felt like God's like, you're in the back of the room for a reason. And it wasn't until
Mm.
earlier this year that I felt like he was like, I put you there on purpose because I have other people who are more agenda focused and they're at the front of the room focused, but you're more back of the room focused to reach the person who's coming in and out quickly. And I was
Wow.
like, what? Like,
Mm.
I have always been so ashamed of being in the back of the room because I thought it was less important. But God's like, look, I got you where I got you for a reason. And like, I need you to
That's so
want to,
good.
I just need you to sit here. And I'm like, man, and those are the best conversations, even when I've been invited to the stage, that it's not the stage me like being like, oh, my talk was so good, I reached so many people. Like, I'm like, I don't remember what I said. I blacked out half of the time. Like, let's be real. Like half the time I blacked out, I was like, oh my God, was it good? And then I listened to the recording and I'm like, that was decent. Good job. But the
Yeah,
back of the
yeah.
room conversation was what I remembered, of someone saying like, this is how I feel. This is what I'm going through. Thank you for sharing this. And that was the one that was the memory I walked away with. And it's like, God's like, I don't need everybody in the front of the room, but I'll pull you up there sometimes. But I need
Yeah, that's
more
so
people
good.
wanting to be in the back. And I'm like, oh, I mean, the back doesn't feel as cool, but both are so fruitful if
Yeah,
you're the right person in the right area. And that, I think
right.
that's
And
been
that,
eye-opening for me.
yeah, and it takes security in like your role and security in like who you are in Christ and what the Lord has like put in your heart and given you the
Yeah.
skill set for and the um what's in front of you to accomplish like the task that He has like
Mm,
anointed you to do. And so being secure in that is like that's so freeing. And
yeah.
that like takes away so much of like the anxiety that comes from comparison
And
or the
yeah,
stress that
and the
comes from like,
jealousy
oh,
too.
I'm not doing
Yeah.
enough and all that. It really gets quieted when you
Mm-hmm.
are confident and secure in
Yeah.
where you're at and what you're doing.
I think that, and like a lot of people will say like it's contentment, but I'm like, no, it is being confident in who you are and secure in who you are, that it's not a threat that somebody else is
Yeah,
doing good. And I think that
yeah,
that's where the jealousy can come from, is like, oh, I'm not, like I used to always think like, yes, contentment is a part of it. You have to get content with where you're at. But the jealousy actually comes from like, oh, I'm not good enough at this because they didn't ask me. And it's like,
right, right.
oh, okay, that's where we got to start working on that. Like, if I don't know who I am and I don't know that God called me to this and gave me these giftings for when He has put me up there, that is where I got to stick with like the heart check that you were talking about. Like, I gotta check my own heart and then just cheer them on, because that does change the game when we start being like, so you pulled so and so in too, that's crazy, good job.
Yeah,
But there, it
yeah.
still comes around. Sometimes I'm like, dang, I didn't get that, like you guys didn't ask me. And I'm like, I
Right.
deal with that with book deals. Like I've been really
Yeah.
struggling with that, and like have had run-ins with like scams and stuff, and people are like, you just have to wait. And I'm like, I've been waiting. I've been waiting a
Right.
long time. But it
Right.
is true. Like, if I keep falling for the scams or like the, running and chasing after what I don't have, to try to get it, I could burn a lot of bridges in the middle of it too. And that's the crazy thing to think of, is like, I could come off as really pushy. But I would also, I was telling my husband, like what it has also kind of done for me is it's making me do it my way. Like I found a new
Mm.
way, and being able to share with other people like, hey, we don't need to be picked up traditionally as a publisher or an
Yeah, right.
author. We just started releasing our own stuff. And I'm not waiting for someone to be like, hey, go start this podcast. I'm like, I could buy I could buy this stuff and just do it. Is it as
Right.
good as having a team? No. But I've also like been able to improve that. And it's only because it's like what I believe in that season, where it's like, I think
Right.
God's asking for this. And that's actually why like I reached out, because I was like, I see you doing this so well, where it's just like you have a reach. I don't even think you understand the reach that you have, which is crazy.
Mm.
Like, you've
Mm.
worked with so many people, you've collaborated with so many people, but like me being able just to watch you and not know who you are, like I'm like, Max seems like someone who is going to see me as a person if I was his friend. It's not
Mm.
just like, hey, see you later, thanks for collaborating, never talk to you again. Like, I'm
Right.
like, man, like I feel like coming into this, I'm like, I feel like I know him a little bit, but now leaving, I'm like, dude, that's gonna be my friend now. And my husband's always like, don't come off strong, girl, because like I do that with everybody. I mean, I'm like, you're my friend now, and then he's like, they don't see you that way. I'm like, but they should. And he's like, girl.
And we're going to get the Hang It Filled conference.
I know. So I'm like, I'm going to be like, everyone else is going to be like, it's Mack. I'm like, that's my friend. Like, I'm going to be sitting with your wife. I'm like, Meredith, I'm here.
Yeah.
But, and that's, we need more people like that. And I used to get really like, it used to be an insecurity where I'm like, I'm too strong of a come in and be your friend kind of person. And it can be scary for some people. Like, I'm not like, you have to be my best friend. But it's like, I have always felt like, I'm like, well, I misread sometimes where it's like we walk together really, really closely for 2-3 years. And I'm like, man, we're best friends. We're stuck together like glue. And they're like, hey, cool, no longer need you for the season. And I'm like,
yeah,
where did that go? Like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
with that, I think that's a wound for a lot of foster youth too, is that fear of like, well, if I build this with you, are you going to see me? So how do we also protect our heart from something like that?
Yeah, man. I don't really even know the answer to that. Like I've experienced a lot of that too. Me and my wife were talking about that recently. I don't remember the proper term for it, but the one that comes to my mind is like micro losses, where you have like people in your life that they don't pass away, they don't move away, but just like over time, you just kind of drift away and they're gone. And so it's even weirder because you're not like mourning in the traditional sense of loss, but you still carry that loss and you still kind of carry that grief of losing that. And I don't have the answer for like, so here's how you deal with that.
Just let yourself work through it.
Yeah, you kind of like, it's okay to feel all those feelings and to be disappointed and to kind of be hurt. And I do think that the worst thing that we can do out of response of that is to just like completely shut ourselves off and to kind of like guard ourselves. And that's what I tend to do. I'm very like, guarded person. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to put all my walls up then if not let anybody in. But I think, it is important to still be vulnerable and to still let yourself like be who you are and be present with people. Now, I think like Jesus is such a good example of that, where he had like all of his followers that kind of knew him at a certain level. Then he had all of his disciples that knew him at like a deeper level. And then he had like the three that were like his crew, that were like, okay, you're going to know me like at an intimate level. And I think like that is like a good model of being like, we can be vulnerable and transparent and authentic and real in who we are. And at different levels of relationship, it's going to be different levels of intimacy and different levels of transparency.
I just keep thinking of that meme that goes around that was like, nobody talks about the real miracle of Jesus having 12 friends.
Like, Jesus making 12 friends as an adult.
They're like, in his 30s. I was like, preach it. But
I know.
Like,
how did that happen?
I'm like, that's the true miracle. But what I don't
It's so true.
It's like I'm friends to people. Like, that's just how we have to look at it, is like, even if you're not best friends. Like, when you really look at it, it wasn't like he was pouring into all 12 the same way he was pouring into the 3. And that's what I think we miss, is that they do what I do. And I'm like, he had friends at 30. What? Like, he had 12 friends. I can have
a dozen friends. Are you kidding me?
But it really, when you really look at his ministry, he was pouring out to hundreds of thousands of people. Then he was pouring into 12 differently. Then he was pouring into 3 very differently. And I think that sometimes I have gotten lost in my seasons of like, well, I'm not pouring into all 12 the same way. And it's like, that's not how it's supposed to be. And I've not been invited into the 3. And I have followed every book out there that's like, this is how to have friendships. And my counselor, she goes, girl, you're doing it. They're just not doing it back. And I was like, she goes, this is the first time you're not the problem. And then she's like, wait, that came out wrong. And I was like, I am not always. But she was like, this is not something you can control, is to be invited into the 3. And I think that comes back down to the whole conversation of like, sometimes you're not invited to that. And it doesn't mean you're less than. It just means that was not your opportunity. But doggone it, we do want it sometimes. Like, we're like, I want to be invited.
Totally.
And I love that you said like, hey, this is normal, still work through this. Because I wouldn't, in looking in, I would be like, oh, I would think he had like every opportunity at his doorstep, and he had to say no to everything. But it's like sometimes you don't get that invitation, and it has nothing to do with your self-worth, your
Right.
ability, the lack of
Right.
relationship. Sometimes it's just like they see it a different type of thing with this, and maybe they're giving the opportunity to someone else who doesn't get opportunities. Like we don't know that conversation. So I think
Right.
that that's also something to take into account, is that I think it just comes down to, we, to feel confident and comfortable, we have to learn who we are and what we offer, and know that that has to be strong first before we'll ever
Yeah.
find that verbiage of life. Yeah, congratulations, good job, and then we just cheer like crazy, even when we are like, man, I wanted the opportunity, good for you. Like
Yeah.
I always
So
think
much of
of,
it really does come back to the identity thing and the
yes,
security in Jesus, and the security in like who we are and who we were created to be. And
yes,
that's
amen.
as simple as like saying a statement like that. That can be like one of the hardest things. It
It
takes a
is.
lifetime to like figure out,
Yeah,
is to
I
having that
agree.
security and building your life
And
on that faith.
that is so much harder to be like, oh, I have to do that first before I can find contentment. Because I'm always like, well, I have to just find
Right.
contentment. It's like, no, I have to sit in my own identity of who I am and what
Yes.
God made me to be, and not feel like that's not enough. Do you have
Right.
anything else to add before we jump off? I'm gonna plug your
No.
album in too, because I
Yeah.
want to make
Yeah.
sure you have all what you want to add in.
Well, just let me just say this to kind of close out that conversation. I think
Yeah.
like one of the greatest gifts of being a dad, and I've got a
Mm.
teenage son, I've got a 9-year-old little girl, and then a 4-year-old little boy.
Mm.
And I think as my children struggle, make mistakes, have to catch
Mm.
them and have consequences for their actions, all that, and they're gonna have those hard conversations.
Yeah.
My heart for them is so much of like, I want to be their biggest champion and their biggest
Yeah.
like supporter. And even in the midst of them making mistakes and falling, my heart for them is always like, I don't want to bring the hammer down as like, here are all the consequences
Mm.
from your actions. I say that to say like, that is, the Lord has been so gracious to allow me to get like those glimpses of like, that's how
Right.
he sees us. That's how he
Mm.
sees me.
Yes.
Is he like sees me in my best light all the time. Like he
Yeah.
wants the best for
Yeah.
me all the time.
Mm.
He loves who I am.
Yeah.
He loves that I am the way that I am. Just
Yeah.
like I love the way my son is. I love who he
Mm.
is. And so if being a dad is like allowed me to get a glimpse of the way that the Lord sees me, that has
Yeah.
been like the greatest gift.
Yeah.
And so that goes all back to that like identity, who we are,
Mm.
and how the Lord sees us and how the Lord like has created us.
I love
So
that.
yeah,
That's such
just
a
wanted to
great way
close
to
with that.
close. Yeah, that's such a
Yeah.
great way to close it out. And you are like, so by the time this airs will be a week that your album is out. So we're
Yep.
gonna plug the album. What is the album called? Where can we find it?
Yeah, the album
I
is
love
called
it.
This Is Holy.
Yes.
It's just a worship album. It's just a lot of songs exalting Jesus. It's a
Mm.
lot of songs about the faithfulness of Jesus. Um, and yeah, I love this record. I'm so
I'm
proud
so
of it, and I'm
excited.
so excited for it to be out in the world. You can listen, I mean, it's wherever you normally listen to music, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all that
I
stuff.
love it.
It's in all those platforms.
I am so excited to listen to it. There's been a couple drops here and there, so I have it
Yeah.
like pre-saved on there, and I'm so like
Yes.
ready for it to go live. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. Like I think like for me, this is just a conversation that I was like, oh my gosh, this has been so validating and like reassuring that we
I've
can
loved
find
this
that
conversation.
contentment. I love it. And I'm like super
Yeah.
excited because I think so many other people are going to benefit from this inside and outside of the foster care system. So you guys can check it out. You can make sure you follow Mack on everything social, and just listen to the album and put it on repeat so we can make it just it's like some of the songs I already listened to. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good. Like I'm so
Thank you
excited
very
about this.
much. Thank you.
All right, you guys have a great day.
All
Thank
right.
you,
See ya.
Mack. You are so awesome.